So, welcome to BareLead, where we strip down leadership to its raw, unfiltered, unabashed truths. I'm Pooja, and today we're
Mhm.
diving into bold decisions, vulnerability, boundaries, and what modern leadership looks like for women today. My guest today is Kim Nijland, and with her, we'll be exploring the importance of boundaries in leadership. And I can't wait for all the listeners to hear her story. So, welcome, Kim. And thank you so much for being here. I've been looking forward to our conversation. Please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself before we dive into some questions.
Yes, well, thank you, Pooja. It's nice to see you again after 4 or 5 years, I
Yeah.
think. We met during one of my ad interim assignments. I've been a leader, an HR leader for, I think, 20 years now. I've done a lot of ad interim jobs, a lot of transformation, a lot of installing new operating models, reorganizations as well. So I've been very busy on that part. I'm a mother of two high school kids, one son, one daughter, Miles and Nina, and living with my husband, near Amsterdam now. So I'm not in Amsterdam anymore, but yeah.
Nice. Very happy to have you. And 20 years is a really long time. And I'm sure that along the way, you wouldn't have survived if you kind of didn't set the boundaries right and, pursued your leadership journey as you did. Could you maybe walk in through what moments really taught you the importance of setting or honoring boundaries as a leader? Because it's not easy, specifically in HR.
No, I do think within HR we always have to balance. We have to balance when we are focusing on the business and connecting with our leaders, and trying to find common boundaries, but also your own boundaries. And it always begins with finding your own boundaries. And within that interim work, it's always very clear when you know where your boundaries are, and that's your framework inside of you. That taught me very much to stay connected to yourself. Um, yeah, be vulnerable at the moment you need to be vulnerable, and having boundaries makes it very clear also to the other person, no matter who's in front of you, what it is you want them to see, but also what you expect from yourself. And it makes it so clear, also clear to the business. And that's always, I think, a center within me that needs to be there to really serve, but also serve myself as a leader and make that impact that I want to make. And it's been a ride. I've been in organizations where I've been challenged, well, almost every hour. Where are my boundaries? What is the common ground? And that makes me grow every time I come into an organization with their values and norms and their way of thinking, their resilience that they want to see within leaders.
Yeah.
Um, so it's always an interesting journey.
Yeah, and I can imagine that, in so many years of leadership experience, it also becomes like a muscle memory for you. But perhaps if I take you back a little bit in the earlier parts of your journey, can you share like an inflection point where you said no, or you asked for slowing down, or you changed how people reach out to you or access you, and how it changed your path in general?
Yeah, I think one of my first interim jobs with an American company. And what they asked me to do to set up a sort of project regarding, and it sounds very simple, on onboarding.
Mm.
And because they saw the high retention rate of the people that came in, and with half a year, with their whole families, they were coming towards Amsterdam. And then I said, within half a year, they left. So we really wanted to figure out what was wrong. What was wrong getting everyone around the world going to Amsterdam and really living there with their family. And it cost also a lot of money. And then I did a deep dive into, of course, the data that was there, but also talking to a lot of people that left at that time. Um, And then I went back to the HR director at that time, and I said, "Well, they're leaving because of A, B, and Z, and this is why it's not sustainable. I can do a project on onboarding for you. I can make it more attractive to people, but still, there is a sort of boundary and also sort of difficulty and obstacles regarding the culture. And when
Mm.
people come and when you have to guide them through their first 6 to 1 year
Yeah.
to land in the organization and try to make sure they understand the culture, also living in Amsterdam. And of course, there's never enough money, but it was a very difficult project because some way, somehow, I knew it would fail. And
Mm.
that was frustrating for me because the elements that were there that needed to be addressed also by the senior leadership over there, they did not want to address. So that made it very difficult to put a plan in place, to put a program in place, to really guide them. But still, the senior leadership didn't want to adapt to certain kinds of elements within their culture.
Yeah.
They were not wanting to own, and that made it very difficult for people to connect to the values, to connect to the senior leadership, to feel welcome, to feel at home. So that was one of my first learnings.
Yeah.
Uh, as much as the project was nice, um, yeah, somehow, some way it failed. And
Yeah.
it was difficult. And after when I left, because we closed it and it was finalized, but you could feel it wasn't going to be adopted fully by the senior leadership. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's a valid point, right? Like because in HR and specifically in the space that all of us have worked in, if that buy-in and that commitment to fulfill their obligations isn't there, then you can be as hardworking, as intelligent, but it still wouldn't land. And I think people step into HR thinking that, we can solve and we can help. And I think there is always a sense of giving more to the organization or to people around us. So it's also important for me to ask you to kind of walk us through what inner work was really required for you to stop over giving or over prove
Mhm.
as you kind of transition into leadership roles, because it's a risky dance, and you can give and you can burn out, or you can learn where to stop. So walk us through that process a little bit.
I think in one of my other interim jobs, um, to be successful in transformation, you need to have a sort of framework that will be owned, and you have the buy-in, and as you just mentioned, from senior leaders. And when I was there, I felt immediately when I stepped in the unsafety
Mm.
part. So then it became very like a sort of sand below you, below your feet. And it felt like there wasn't a clear framework and there wasn't boundaries, also not led by the senior leadership. What was important at that time that I really needed to stay grounded. But sometimes I felt like I had to overcompensate and over deliver
Mm.
to show the other person or the other leaders what it needed to be done
Yeah.
from this part in this phase of the transformation. And transformation is all about adapting to a new situation, about owning the change, not only HR, not only a part of the senior leadership team, but everyone.
Mm.
And if it's not there, again, it will, you have to slow down. And that was a very tricky part because telling people to slow down, first go back to the first phase in a kind of transformation, yeah, that was tricky, and I fell into a trap to then again over compensate
Mm.
to really make sure they listened.
Mm.
And what I had to do at that time, I did it the second time because it was a big learning to just be quiet, just to see what happens, just to go and feel. You go slowly into that first wall when you go in a transformation phase, and then make them understand, because you can do a lot of things with words and over telling and over promising and over delivering, but sometimes you really need to step aside and just show them
Yeah.
what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know already, because as we both have been in the HR environment, sometimes you need to do it before you can step into that next phase you want to go through, and then redesign a little bit just to make sure it clicks to everyone and everyone understands what needs to be done. But I have been in that situation when I thought, if I only work harder, if I only do things better, then everything will fall into place. But I felt really at that time alone,
Mm.
um, because everyone was so busy with their own over-promising part. And
Yeah.
then you feel so disconnected. And then whatever you do, it doesn't work completely. It doesn't stick. And that's what you want, because you want to make that impact. You want to deliver the project, the transformation, a redesign of a global function. You want to do a lot on that part. But if they're not ready, don't jump and don't think you can overpromise or over deliver, because they will not listen. It's timing. I always say it's about timing. When people can adapt change, it's timing when you really connect and the other person listens, but also for yourself. Sometimes I need to hear things 2 or 3 times, and then I think, hey, now it clicks.
Mm.
So that also is within an organization. You have that dynamics within an organization when they, yeah, do not want to change.
Yeah.
Definitely do not want to change. And you're the only one on the other side that says, hey guys, you really need to go through this.
Yeah.
But timing, it's also a lot about timing.
I feel you. I think if I was not wearing full sleeves, you would see goosebumps. But
Yeah.
I feel you when you say that. And I think it's so important. And you kind of condensed like almost 10 years of learnings in one sentence where you say that um, try, you'll fail, and then kind of observe what fails if you don't try, and then put in the effort, to make it click with the right kind of audience. And I've kind of seen over and over again, like if you do pilot testing and you kind of warm people up a little bit earlier, that always works better than throwing a slide deck and agenda and saying this is how you need to move. People don't want to move. And it's as simple as that. So thank you for sharing. And I think it's also good for me to dive a little bit deeper into at a personal level because you mentioned um, overcompensating, overgiving, and over delivering. And that kind of shows a lot of vulnerability also, right? Because you're exposing yourself to rejection or, potentially not having a buy-in at the end of the process. So how do you balance the sense of vulnerability and clear boundaries? Of course, over time you get better at it, but how do you balance it personally?
To always say, wherever I am, with a team or without a team, or to be very honest that we are imperfect and every organization is different. So I also need to learn again how
Mm.
the culture, how the indifference clicks together, because you find each other in the, I always say, in the imperfectness, to see whether some person has that talent over here and the other one has the talent over there, and there you need to combine the talents together, and then you see synergy. So but I had to learn the hard way. I've been in organizations where there was so much unsafety,
Mm.
and you need to finish whatever you needed to finish. So I had in the back of my mind how I cannot solve the unsafety, but I can stay grounded and be clear on my boundaries. and go from there. And also, what I always do, I have my risk and I have my mitigations assessment. How far can I go, and how far um, can I change this process or this topic or this transformation? And when I'm clear on that part to other leaders, then it's a sort of, again, do you see it the same way as I see it? And not only for myself, but also the buy-in that we know we can only finish half of what we said we would do.
Yeah.
And we have to deal with that. But I also think vulnerability and unsafe, because vulnerability can also happen when you are in an unsafe environment. And when that happens, I don't know if you ever had been in that kind of situation, then also senior leaders try to also have different behaviors or extreme behaviors. And that's always a very interesting time when you land in that phase,
Yeah.
because everyone is trying to or cover up or not becoming
Mm,
vulnerable or becoming too vulnerable.
mm,
When then burnout hits, a lot of things hit people because of the unsafe environment. And I do think a lot of companies need to protect, stay in a safe environment, because then real business can go forward, real change can happen. Um, and on the vulnerability part, um, yeah, being vulnerable, I think, is essential when you need to deliver something. You also have to know yourself very well to know what you are capable of
yeah.
and what kind of skills you need from the others to
Mm,
succeed, and
yeah.
capability. So if you know that for yourself, and I think within senior leaders, it's essential to know that for yourself,
Yeah.
uh, to go and make that change within yourself, but also within a project, within a reorganization, within a transformation.
Yeah.
And that's essential. And sometimes you bump into senior leaders that don't have it or not there yet, but want to.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a journey. It's always a journey together. It's never alone.
Mm.
Uh,
I think it's like you touched upon so many points. The first part is, of course, that you're not alone because organization as a whole is suffering from either lack of vulnerability or vulnerability not being welcomed enough, for example. And I think what you also mentioned is the part about self-awareness. So knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are so that you can, create synergies with people around you and move forward, which is a healthy form of vulnerability. And I think you also touched briefly on the psych safety aspect, because I've seen that, as people, even if you want to be vulnerable, it's not necessarily a trait that's valued in every organization, where, it can also work against you. So testing waters and making sure that this is a safe environment to actually be vulnerable is also an important insight there.
no, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think people are still afraid, Kim, people are still
Mm.
afraid because these are difficult times. Layoffs are rampant, and sometimes they also come without any context for people. So there is a sense of people just walking around on eggshells. So protecting their image, protecting their ego, protecting their emotions, not inviting a lot of scrutiny on aspects that they don't want to. So, what would you say to women leaders specifically who are moving to these roles? And how can they lead with strong boundaries still? Because sometimes saying no to things also comes at a cost, right? And that cost can also cost you your job. So, what would you recommend there?
Yeah, well, I'm not them. The only thing I can say for myself is, at the end of the day, you have to look in the mirror of what you have done, the mistakes you have made during the day, and the learnings that came out of it. And I do think you will always feel um, when you are not connected and grounded, and you feel like the framework and the boundaries that you have for yourself are not fully met or not appreciated or respected. And I think the respect is very important. I think for everyone, not only the women, but also the men. But I think respect is one of the things is key if you want your own talent and your own skills thrive
Mm.
next to the teams you have, the people are around you, the senior leaders that you want to inspire. Um, and I do think when at the end of the day you can still say I'm true to myself, and I still feel that I can make the impact within this organization, you are still there to make impact, and you are still there to be seen. And if one of these aspects doesn't connect anymore, sometimes it's also, yeah, rough, then it's time to go and learn somewhere else, or find, of course, another way to extend your leadership skills, of course. But if one of those things do not click anymore for you, you also have to be honest. And again, this is a very changing and transformative time for a lot of big companies, and the layoffs, I've seen them, and I think in the coming 2 years it will be an interesting time.
Yeah.
And the AI is also kicking in for a lot of functions, um, but it is okay.
Yeah.
When you are scared and thinking about your own job and staying scared, you will not progress. You will not grow, because you're only focused on keeping things as they are. And that's always something that will not make you grow, and yeah, make you resilient. Because this is also a time when a lot of things changes, and just adapt. Be a little bit more agile. Be resilient. Speak up.
Yeah.
And now more than ever is the time, and not to stay silent. And yeah, I
Yeah.
think it is for all of us. It's a good time to push and be resilient and be adaptive, and don't be afraid. No.
Yeah. I think sometimes if you're walking against the tide, you're bound to fall, right? You're bound to not float there.
Yeah.
So, what you mentioned there is the whole part about agility. And I think in terms of skill set, there is so much out there that you can learn, incorporate in your habits and, ways of working. I think most people just struggle with the mindset and shifting that in order to just be open to learnings. And I think biggest growths come when you embrace the unknown. And I think it's a great part right now, because I believe that the layoffs are not necessarily only happening for cost cutting and budget optimization reasons. I think it's also happening because people are still figuring out. People are just figuring out what their optimal setup looks like. And sometimes it's not a personal accusation against somebody who's delivered or not delivered. It's really about organizational dynamics there. So thank you for sharing your insights there. And
No, thank you. Yeah, I fully agree with what you just said. Yeah.
yeah, I think you have condensed so much information in the past, 20 odd minutes, and also your insights, because I believe that, every HR person who navigates this whole space of uncertainty and personalities and egos, they can derive a lot of value from what you just mentioned without crossing those hurdles themselves, because it can be hard hitting if you do face them yourself. So thank you. This was very inspiring for me. And thanks to everybody who tuned into BareLead. If you loved this conversation, you can leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Music. I'm Pooja, and I'll see you next time for more raw, stripped down leadership truths. And until then, keep it real.